Hello, forest friends, and welcome to the back porch. Please step on up as we enjoy another session of Back Porch Forestry. I'm Dr. David Merker, Extension Forester with the University of Tennessee, and I'm happy to host these educational sessions. Most of us enjoy the season of fall, and it's clearly upon us today. It's a brisk day for the forest. Autumn begins sort of a time of rest. Throughout the growing season, the trees have sequestered carbon to create sugar, to produce wood, and to enlarge their fruit. Hard mass, as it's known, such as acorns, walnuts, and hickory nuts, ripen and become available, not only so that trees can sustain their own species, but also to benefit wildlife as well. So acorns are of special interest to many of us. So today we're going to examine how do acorns develop. It's a very abbreviated session, and the very last slide, you'll see a URL that summarizes this entire publication that was written a number of years ago. So let me go ahead and boot up the presentation, and we'll begin. Back Porch Forestry, we're now beginning our third year of these things, and appreciate all those that have enjoyed these sessions and have friended the program. So how do acorns develop? I've got a slide here just representing a number of acorns. You can see they come in a variety of shapes and sizes. The very top acorns are bur oak. It's typically found kind of in lower, maybe around rivers and creeks and streams and so forth. Not a species that's real common to our state, but it's the largest of all acorns, and it is one of the white oak acorns. Going down clockwise, you see shoe-marked oak. A very valuable tree, one of the red oaks. Beneath that is another red oak, a pin oak. You notice it's a small acorn with a very narrow, thin-like cap. We've got the blackjack oak. It reminds me of a top. It looks like a top that you might spin. Chestnut oak is common on the dry sites throughout the region. Overcup oak is another one of the white oaks. The name is given because of the cap goes over the acorn, hence the name Overcup oak, found down in the river areas. And then sawtooth oak, that's not native of Tennessee at all. It's planted primarily for acorn production for wildlife. Although wildlife don't necessarily prefer it more, these species produce acorns at an early age. Many people don't recommend the planting of that species because it's not native to the area. So, variety of acorns. Now, there are some differences between red oak and white oak acorns that I just wanted to draw out as we get started here. We begin with the red oak, the general species red oaks. Their acorn is going to taste bitter. They have a lot of tannin in them. Now, that doesn't mean wildlife won't eat them because they're going to eat whatever's available at the time. But they might prefer white oak over red oak because of this bitter taste that red oaks have. Red oak acorns require 2 years to mature. So what that means is the flowers that emerge in the spring and fertilize in the spring have to go through an entire, essentially, year and a half growing season, become available the following year, fall, which makes it kind of beneficial for wildlife because in some years when white oak aren't producing, red oak might be, and vice versa. The inner shell cap of the red oak acorn is woolly or silky. They do germinate in the spring, meaning that they require a stratification period or a cold snap that the acorns must go through before they can successfully germinate. And then the leaves of red oak trees, and this is a general rule of thumb, will have bristle tips on the end of their lobes. Looking at white oak, the acorns tend to be a little sweeter in taste. And so if given the opportunity, deer, turkey, squirrels might prefer the white oak species more so than the red oak. White oak acorns mature in 1 year, so they don't have to go through a year and a half, as I mentioned with the red oak. The inner shell of the cap of the white oak is smooth. The white oaks germinate in the fall, and I say usually they germinate. Oftentimes you'll be walking around late fall, maybe deer hunting, you'll see acorns actually beginning to grow in the fall of the year if they haven't been consumed by the wildlife. And then the leaves have rounded lobes without the bristle tips for white oak. Now, oaks in general, all oaks are monoecious. That's a botanical term that means that both the male and the female flowers are on the same tree. So potentially every tree of reproductive age is capable of producing acorns. although cross-pollination is with nearby oaks is common and often leads to more successful acorn crop. Red oaks tend to flower about 2 weeks earlier than white oaks do. And what you'll notice too is that pollen is shed 1 to 2 weeks after the male flowers appear and over a period of 3 or 4 days. Of course, we notice this in the spring when the yellow pollen covers so many of our vehicles and outdoor furniture and so forth. Here's an example of both male and female flowers on a southern red oak. And so you'll notice these are the male flowers. They appear like beads on a string that sort of droop down. So they appear first right on these terminal buds. There's there's flower buds as well as buds that lead to stems. And you notice these buds produce the male flowers. They arrive a few weeks prior to the female flowers. And if you look closely, you can see the female flowers that form on this initial stem that grows in the spring of the year, very small. And so this is where the pollen will be received to help fertilize the acorns. Taking this to the next level, if you go further into the growing season, then this is a red oak, one of the red oaks, and you'll see. You remember I mentioned that acorns of red oak species require 2 years to mature. These are acorns that actually fertilized the prior spring, and that's the current year. In other words, that they'll fall during the current year, and these are the acorns that will fall next year. So these fertilized during the current spring of the year. So you can actually roughly predict what kind of an acorn crop you're going to have a full year in advance for the red oak species. The white oak, that's not the case. So in this particular example, we've got a good crop for this fall and a good crop for next fall. You'll see the acorns form on the pedestals there. And they'll remain small until the next spring's growing season when they'll begin to plumpen up. Well, what factors affect acorn production? Theories are all over the place. We try to summarize it for you. The main thing, number one, is weather, and that's specifically weather during the pollination season. This is the most influential. In other words, spring weather. If we have excessive rain, that's detrimental because rather than the pollen floating around as it should, it tends to run off or drip off the branches and not reach the female flowers. Of course, cool, damp weather will hinder pollination, particularly as the pollen tries to float around. Freezing, of course, is going to kill both the male and female flowers, late season freezing. And then high winds. You would think wind would be a good thing. Mild winds are good, but high winds can actually blow the pollen off target. For instance, if a tree is adjacent to a field or a playground or a baseball field, whatnot, and the wind's coming from that opposite direction, it blows the pollen out into an area without oak trees present. Insects are very detrimental. Weevils will bore into the acorns throughout the growing season. Remember, acorns are full of a lot of energy. There's a lot of carbohydrates that are stored in the acorn, so everything wants to eat them. And the weevils work on them before they fall, before they drop in the autumn season. And you'll notice a small boring hole into the acorns. In fact, that's one of the things during acorn production or collection in the fall of the year. If we're trying to collect acorns for outplanting, we float the acorns in advance once they've been collected. The ones that float are not fertile, and that's probably because the weevils have bored into them and consume the carbohydrates inside it. The third reason then is drought during the growing season. Trees will abort acorns to preserve moisture. Not only does it take a lot of energy to plumpen up an acorn, but it also takes a lot of water to do so. And if water is limiting, the tree is going to essentially abort these acorns to redirect the water to more important life-sustaining processes. So you'll sometimes see acorns falling in July of the year and wondering what's going on. They might be small, and that's the reason why. Genetic makeup is a big factor that affects acorn production. According to Dr. Craig Harper, who studied this, only 33% of the oak trees are good producers. And so that's just the nature of them. Sometimes year after year, you go back to the same tree as I've done right off the back porch. I've got a chinkapin white oak. It flowers every year and it's never produced an acorn. Continuing with these factors, age, of course, is important too. Most species of oak begin producing acorns at about 20 years old, or roughly about 6 inches in diameter, and they will continue, and peak production occurs at about age 50 to 80. Of course, this depends on a number of factors, but then it will taper off as trees begin to become over mature. Again, trees will have to redirect their energy away from acorn production and more toward the physiological processes for it to survive, such as respiration. 7, acorn production improves with healthy trees in dominant crown position. In other words, they're high up in there, maybe reaching above the other trees. They've got good, healthy, large crowns, and on good sites too. That can affect acorn production. And then finally, a year of heavy acorn production may use up stored nitrogen, and few acorns may be produced the following year. That's true not only for oak trees, but I notice that with my persimmons quite regularly, that they'll produce a good crop of persimmon one year and nothing the next year, and maybe nothing for the next couple of years, and then it will pick up again. Well, the majority of acorns are not viable. I've seen the figure, I've forgotten the figure, but it's something like 90% of all acorns succumb either to weevils, to the weather, or to wildlife, and very few actually make it to the position where they actually can germinate, such as this one. And you'll see they germinate from the base of the acorns, turned upside down here. But the seedling emerges and comes up. The radical then is that part of the plant embryo that develops into the primary root. So you'll see that here's the radical germinating acorn. Taking it one step further, it looks like that. Then we know we've had success. Now, getting oak seedlings to reach this size, Dr. Clatterbucks has his hand on one that's about as tall as he is a real accomplishment, given everything that has to occur from the pollination, the weather, the predation, and even the sunlight. Just because the acorn germinates doesn't mean that it's going to survive, because it has to have sunlight to continue. So it's a rare find to get oak to this size, a real accomplishment, and it's a challenge for foresters as they practice silviculture and forest management. Should you fertilize trees to produce more and sweeter acorns? According to research was done by our wildlife biologist, Dr. Craig Harper, this is what he says. There are no data to support the notion that fertilizing oaks leads to increased acorn production. There are only 1 or 2 good mast years out of 5, and this is not related to soil nutrients. Poor pollination, as I've said, late frost, drought, and acorn weevils limit acorn production, regardless of whether a tree is fertilized or not. And then he continues with these thoughts that I want to share with you. Do all oaks produce equally? We've addressed that, but over a 3-year period, among individual trees, 25% of the white oaks produced 90%, 87%, and 67% of the acorns, respectively, over a 3-year period. So in other words, in the first year, these 25% produced 90% of the acorns. In the second year of the study, these 25% produced 87% of the acorns, and then it was a little bit lower in the final year at 67%. Well, that concludes our session of Back Porch Forestry. As I said, it's going to be brief today. As always, I encourage you to fill out the survey. You'll have to maybe type in that URL. It will also be located back on the YouTube site if it's easier for you to do that. And then also I mentioned the publication, How Do Acorns Develop? If you want to look at this in greater detail, a publication was developed by myself, as well as a couple other professors at the University of Tennessee. So avail yourself to that. Thanks for your time on the back porch. I've enjoyed it and look forward to another session in the future. Thank you.